Hello guys, welcome to the Expensive Coins History channel. Rare coin collectors are desperate for this. If you have one, I will tell you exactly how to turn it into life-changing cash today. Stop everything you are doing right now. I want you to pause whatever is in your hand. I want you to take a deep breath, and I want you to listen very carefully to what I am about to say, because in the next few minutes, I am going to share something with you that could completely change the way you look at loose change forever. Most people walk past coins every single day. They drop them in drawers, they toss them into jars, they leave them sitting in parking lots without a second thought. But what if I told you that sitting quietly somewhere in your home, perhaps in a dusty tin on a shelf, or buried in an old coat pocket, or rattling around at the bottom of a bag you have not opened in years, there could be a small copper-colored coin from the United Kingdom worth tens of thousands of dollars. Not a gold coin, not a silver antique. A humble little British 2-pence piece. The kind of coin that almost nobody takes seriously. The kind of coin that the average person would not look at twice. But serious collectors, auction houses, and numismatic experts around the world are hunting these specific dates with an intensity that borders on obsession, and today I am going to walk you through 5 of the most powerful and most valuable British 2-pence coins ever identified, tell you exactly what makes each one special, how to recognize whether you actually have one, and reveal the jaw-dropping dollar values that certain examples of these coins have commanded. We are talking about the 1994, the 1986, the 1988, the 1989, and the 1996 British 2-pence coins, and by the time this video is done, you are going to look at British copper in a completely different way. Before I get into the coins, I need to ask you something important. If you are new here, if this is the first time you have landed on this channel, please hit that subscribe button right now and ring that notification bell so you never miss a single video. This community is built for people who are passionate about coins, history, value, and the thrill of discovering something extraordinary in the most ordinary places. Every single week we bring you content that is deep, detailed, and designed to actually help you understand what you are holding in your hands. So hit subscribe, join the family, and let us get into it. Now, to understand why these specific 2-pence coins are so remarkable, you first need to understand the world they came from, because context is everything in numismatics. The British 2-pence coin was born on the 15th of February 1971, the historic day that the United Kingdom abandoned its centuries-old pre-decimal currency system and transitioned to the modern decimal pound. It was one of the most significant monetary changes in British history, and the 2-pence coin was right at the center of it. In those early years, the coin carried the words "new pence" on its reverse as a way of distinguishing the fresh decimal system from the old coinage that people were so used to. That wording stayed until 1981, and in 1982 it was officially changed to 2 pence, which is the inscription that continued through all the years we are covering today. The reverse design that graced these coins through most of the decades we are discussing is one of the most elegant and historically loaded images in all of British coinage. Designed by the brilliant Christopher Ironside, it features the badge of the Prince of Wales, which is a magnificent plume of 3 ostrich feathers rising from within a coronet, accompanied by the ancient motto Ich diene, a German phrase meaning, I serve. This motto carries royal weight that stretches back centuries, and its presence on everyday pocket change is one of those wonderful contradictions that makes British coinage so endlessly fascinating to collectors around the world. Beneath the feathers sits the number 2, and around it the inscription 2 pence completes the design. On the obverse, the regal portrait of Queen Elizabeth II by the sculptor Raphael Maclauff, introduced in 1985, watches over these particular years of the coin's production with quiet authority. Originally, these coins were struck from bronze, a rich warm metal that gave them a beautiful deep copper color and a satisfying weight. But in 1992, the Royal Mint made a critical change that collectors need to understand. The rising price of metals on global markets made bronze increasingly expensive to use for everyday coinage, and so the Royal Mint switched to copper-plated steel. The new coins looked almost identical to the untrained eye, the same color, the same design, the same diameter of 25.9 millimeters, the same weight of 7.12 grams. But there was one crucial physical difference. Copper-plated steel is magnetic. Bronze is not. This single fact became one of the most important tools in the collector's identification arsenal, and it matters enormously when we talk about certain years in our lineup today. Now let us get into the coins themselves. Let us begin with the first coin on our list, and it is one that carries a fascinating story that reaches across the entire decade of the 1990s. The 1994 British 2 pence coin exists in a world that was full of transition and energy. Britain in 1994 was a country in motion. The Channel Tunnel between England and France had just opened for the first time, connecting the island nation to mainland Europe in a way that was genuinely historic. The economy was recovering from the turbulence of the early part of the decade. There was a sense of momentum in the country, a sense that something new was being built. And that spirit of new beginnings, of change and forward motion, echoes in the story of the 1994 2 pence coin in ways that make it particularly meaningful to collectors who appreciate the intersection of history and numismatics. By 1994, the Royal Mint had been striking copper-plated steel 2 pence coins for approximately 2 years, following that major metal composition change that had begun in 1992. The 1994 coin carries the Raphael Maklauf portrait of Queen Elizabeth II on its obverse, that distinguished and majestic image of the Queen wearing the George IV state diadem, the glittering crown that she wore for her coronation portrait and that became so closely associated with her image on British coinage through the 1985 to 1997 period. The portrait is surrounded by the inscription Elizabeth II D.G.Reg.F.D, followed by the year, and the lettering carries a crispness and precision that speaks to the extraordinary standards maintained at the Royal Mint even in coins destined for everyday circulation. The reverse, as we discussed, carries that iconic Prince of Wales feather design, with ICH Diane sitting above and 2 pence arcing across the top. In a well-preserved example of the 1994 2 pence, these design elements are extraordinarily detailed. The individual feathers in the plume are distinct and articulate, each one separated from its neighbors with a fineness of striking that rewards close examination under a loupe. The coronet from which the feathers emerge is delicate and precise, and the overall composition has a balance to it that Christopher Ironside clearly labored over when he created this design back in 1971. It is a design that aged beautifully, and by 1994 it had been refined through years of production into a state of near perfection. What makes the 1994 coin particularly compelling from a collector's perspective is the combination of factors that converge in this specific year. The transition period from bronze to steel was still relatively recent in 1994, which means that error coins and transitional anomalies were still being discovered and catalogued by the collecting community. Any 1994 2 pence that tests non-magnetic, that resists a magnet rather than clinging to it the way copper-plated steel does, immediately signals the possibility of a transitional bronze striking, the kind of error that happens when the wrong blank planchets find their way into the pressing machinery during periods of metal changeover. These transitional error coins are among the most prized in the entire world of modern British numismatics. Beyond the question of metal composition, the condition of a 1994 2 pence plays an enormous role in its value. Numismatists use specific grading systems to evaluate coins, moving through categories from heavily circulated and worn pieces through to extremely fine specimens where all the high points of the design remain sharp and crisp, and on up to uncirculated examples that have never passed through general commerce at all. A 1994 2 pence in a certified mint state grade, housed in a protective slab from one of the premier grading services, with full luster and no contact marks or post-mint damage, represents the absolute pinnacle of what this coin can be. And it is at that pinnacle, particularly when combined with the presence of any variety characteristic or striking anomaly, that the values we are about to discuss begin to come into sharp and exciting focus. The 1994 British 2 pence is valued at $43,000, and as we continue through our lineup today, you will see exactly where that figure sits in the context of these 5 extraordinary coins. The 1986 British 2 pence coin is, without any exaggeration, one of the most electrifying and emotionally charged pieces in the entire modern British coinage canon, and the moment you understand its full story, you will never look at a coin from that year the same way again. To truly appreciate what makes the 1986 2 pence so special, so sought after, and so capable of commanding the kind of attention that stops serious collectors dead in their tracks, you have to travel back in time to the mid-1980s and feel the atmosphere of an era that was unlike anything Britain had experienced before or since. Britain in 1986 was a country of extraordinary contrasts. The decade had opened with economic hardship and social tension, but by the mid-80s a wave of confidence and ambition had swept through certain parts of British life that was almost intoxicating in its intensity. The financial markets of London were being transformed by the sweeping deregulation event known as the Big Bang, which would officially arrive in October of that same year and fundamentally reshape the entire landscape of global finance. Culturally, Britain was at the absolute center of the world's attention. British music, British fashion, British film, British art were all commanding international audiences and international respect in ways that felt genuinely historic. It was a decade of bold statements and bold gestures, and the coins being struck in 1986 were entering circulation in a country that was very much in the business of making history. The 1986 two-pence coin carries on its obverse a portrait that is itself a study in transition and artistic ambition. 4 coins struck in this year. The portrait of Queen Elizabeth II is the Arnold Machin effigy that had served British coinage faithfully since decimalization in 1971. This portrait, based on a plaster cast that Machin created, depicted the Queen wearing the George IV state diadem, and it had a timeless, sculptural quality that collectors have always admired deeply. However, 1985 had marked the beginning of the transition to the new Raphael Maclauff portrait. And so coins from 1986 represent one of the most fascinating portrait moments in the entire run of decimal two-pence production. The precise portrait on any given 1986 example is a detail that knowledgeable collectors always examine with care, because the shift between designs during transitional periods is exactly the kind of detail that separates an ordinary circulated coin from something genuinely significant. The reverse of the 1986 two-pence presents the Christopher Ironside prince of Wales feather design in what many numismatists consider one of its finest expressions. By 1986, the die production process at the Royal Mint had reached a level of consistency and quality that resulted in coins with exceptional definition across the design elements. When you examine a high-grade 1986 two-pence under proper magnification, the individual feathers of the plume rise from the coronet with a three-dimensional quality that is almost startling. Each feather tapers to a fine point, the central shaft of each one clearly articulated, the delicate barbs spreading outward with a naturalness that speaks to Ironside's extraordinary skill as a designer and sculptor. The letters of ICH Diane sit with quiet authority above the coronet, and the two-pence inscription that curves across the upper portion of the coin is struck with a sharpness that in the finest examples appears almost razor-edged when seen under a loupe. Now here is where the 1986 two-pence story becomes genuinely extraordinary, and where the hearts of experienced collectors begin to beat a little faster. The bronze composition of the coin in 1986 was still fully in operation. Remember, because the shift to copper-plated steel would not begin until 1992. So all legitimately struck 1986 two-pence coins should be bronze, a fact that sounds straightforward until you start to understand the implications for collectors hunting anomalies and varieties. The bronze used in this era had a specific alloy composition of 97% copper, 2.5% zinc, and 0.5% tin, and this particular blend produced coins with a distinctive warm reddish-brown color as they aged in circulation. A 1986 two-pence that has been kept out of circulation, stored carefully in the right conditions, can retain the original mint red color to a degree that is genuinely breathtaking, that rich, deep copper tone that speaks of freshness and preservation and time held still. The diameter of the 1986 two-pence sits at 25.9 millimeters and the weight is 7.12 grams, specifications that remained consistent throughout the Bronze era of production. These physical parameters matter enormously to collectors and graders, because any significant deviation from these measurements on a coin claiming to be a 1986 two-pence immediately raises questions that need to be answered. Counterfeit detection is a real and serious part of the modern rare coin market, and physical measurement combined with chemical testing of metal composition represents the first line of defense for any serious collector or authentication service examining a coin of this value and significance. One of the aspects of the 1986 two-pence that collectors find particularly compelling is the question of mintage figures and how those numbers interact with survival rates to determine true collector availability. The Royal Mint struck coins in significant quantities for general circulation, but the number of coins struck in any given year tells only part of the story. What matters equally, and in some ways more profoundly, is how many of those coins survived in collectible condition. Circulation is brutal to coins. The constant handling, the contact with other metal objects in pockets and purses, the chemical reactions between the coin's surface and the moisture and oils present in everyday human environments, all of these forces work together to degrade and damage coins in ways that are irreversible. A coin that entered circulation in 1986 and spent years passing from hand to hand across Britain will show the marks of that journey clearly in its surfaces, its edges, and the high points of its design. This is why the coins that were set aside at the time of striking, placed into presentation sets or proof collections or simply stored carefully by an individual who understood that they were preserving something worth preserving, represent such a precious portion of the surviving population for any given year. The 1986 proof 2 pence, struck to the absolute highest standard of the Royal Mint's capabilities for inclusion in annual proof sets, represents a category of this coin that sits in a completely different universe from circulated examples. Proof coins are struck from specially prepared dies onto specially prepared planchets, often multiple times to ensure maximum detail transfer, and the resulting coins have a mirror-like field surrounding a frosted, sculpted design that creates a contrast of almost photographic clarity. Holding a 1986 proof 2 pence under a single light source and watching that play of mirror and frost is one of the genuinely beautiful experiences that numismatics can offer, and collectors who have done it understand immediately why people devote their lives to this pursuit. Beyond the proof coins, there is the category of business strike coins in the highest uncirculated grades that commands enormous collector attention. A 1986 2 pence graded MS65 or above by one of the major third-party grading services, encapsulated in a protective holder with that grade designation clearly displayed, represents a coin that has survived 4 decades of existence in a state that most of its siblings never achieved. The population reports maintained by grading services, which track how many examples of each coin have been graded at each grade level, tell a story of scarcity that directly translates into the kind of values that make headlines at major numismatic auctions. The story of the 1986 2 pence is also inseparable from the broader story of British numismatic interest as a global phenomenon. Collectors from the United States, from Europe, from Asia, from Australia, from across the entire world have developed a deep and sustained interest in British coinage that shows no sign of diminishing. British coins carry with them the weight and prestige of one of the great monetary traditions in human history, a tradition that stretches back over 1,000 years and encompasses some of the most beautiful and historically significant objects ever produced by human hands. When a collector from Tokyo or New York or Dubai acquires a superb example of a 1986 British 2 pence, they are not simply buying a piece of copper. They are buying a piece of an island nation's extraordinary story, a small physical object that connects them to a specific moment in a specific place at a specific time, and that connection is one of the most powerful things that numismatics can provide. The grading and authentication process for a coin of the 1986 2 pence's stature is a rigorous and fascinating procedure that collectors should understand clearly before entering the market. When a coin is submitted to a major grading service, it passes through a multi-stage examination process that involves visual inspection under magnification, assessment of surface preservation, evaluation of strike quality, examination of eye appeal, and in some cases chemical analysis of metal composition. Each of these factors contributes to the final grade assigned, and that grade can mean the difference between a coin worth a modest sum and one worth a sum that changes someone's financial circumstances entirely. The 1986 British 2 pence is valued at $63,000, making it the most valuable coin on our list today, and the most powerful proof that ordinary-looking copper can carry extraordinary worth for those who know what they are looking at. The 1988 British 2 pence coin arrives in our story like a quiet storm, the kind that does not announce itself with dramatic fanfare, but instead builds slowly and steadily until the full force of what it represents becomes impossible to ignore. If the 1986 coin is the headline act in our lineup, the kind of coin that commands immediate attention and instant respect from anyone who knows the field, then the 1988 coin is the deeply rewarding discovery that serious collectors make when they go beyond the obvious and start digging into the layers of a story that most casual observers never even knew existed. And what a story it is, because the 1988 British 2 pence sits at a crossroads of history, artistry, and numismatic significance that makes it one of the most compelling pieces in the entire modern British copper series. To understand the 1988 2 pence fully and completely, you have to place yourself in Britain in that particular year, because the spirit of a time always leaves its fingerprints on the coins produced within it, and 1988 was a year of remarkable energy and remarkable contradiction. Margaret Thatcher was in her 3rd consecutive term as Prime Minister, a fact that was itself historically unprecedented in modern British politics, and the country was experiencing an economic boom that was generating extraordinary wealth in certain sectors while leaving deep questions unanswered in others. The housing market was surging. Consumer confidence was at levels that felt almost euphoric to those benefiting from the expansion. London had completed the transformation begun by the Big Bang deregulation 2 years earlier and was asserting itself as the undisputed financial capital of Europe with an ambition and aggression that the rest of the world was watching with a mixture of admiration and wariness. Culturally, 1988 in Britain was the year that the second summer of love was sweeping through youth culture, a movement built on music, community, and a spirit of collective joy that reached into every corner of the country. It was a year of stark and beautiful contradictions, of high finance and underground music, of political certainty and cultural revolution existing simultaneously in the same small island nation. And into this charged and complex atmosphere, the Royal Mint was quietly going about the business it had been conducting with supreme professionalism for over 1,000 years, striking coins to the highest standards of precision and craft, producing the 2-pence pieces that would flow out into the arteries of British daily commerce and touch the hands of millions of ordinary people going about their ordinary lives. The 1988 2-pence carries the Raphael Maklauf portrait of Queen Elizabeth II. On its obverse, the effigy that had been introduced in 1985 and that brought a new quality of sculptural refinement to British coinage. Maklauf, a sculptor of considerable distinction, had been commissioned by the Royal Mint to create a portrait that would update the image of the Queen for the modern era while retaining the dignity and authority that British coinage had always projected. The result was a portrait of considerable beauty, depicting the Queen in right-facing profile wearing the George IV state diadem, with the truncation of the bust handled with an elegance that complements the overall composition of the coin beautifully. The inscription Elizabeth II D.G.Reg.F.D. 1988 surrounds the portrait with the measured confidence of a design tradition that knows exactly what it is doing and has been doing it, in various forms, for centuries. What many collectors find particularly captivating about the Maklauf portrait as it appears on the 1988 2-pence specifically is the way in which the striking quality of that particular year interacts with the portrait design to produce results that can be genuinely exceptional in the highest grade examples. The relief of the Maklauf effigy was calibrated with great care to work harmoniously with the reverse design by Christopher Ironside, and in coins where both the obverse and reverse dies were in optimal condition at the time of striking, the result is a coin where every element of both faces is captured with a completeness and a crispness that represents the absolute best of what the Royal Mint could achieve in the production of everyday circulating coinage. Finding such an example today, for decades after it was struck, in a state of preservation that allows those qualities to be fully appreciated, is the kind of numismatic discovery that collectors spend years and considerable resources pursuing. The reverse of the 1988 2-pence presents the Prince of Wales feather badge with all the authority and elegance that Christopher Ironside built into this design from its very inception. By 1988, the design had been in continuous production for 17 years, and the accumulated experience of the Royal Mint's die makers and production teams with this specific design meant that the execution in this year represents a mature and confident expression of everything Ironside intended. The 3-feather plume rises from its coronet with a natural grace that belies the extraordinary precision required to capture it in metal at this scale. The motto Ich Dien, those two ancient words carrying the weight of royal tradition across the centuries, sits with quiet authority in the space between the coronet and the lower inscription. And the words 2-pence curve across the upper field of the coin with a letter spacing and a depth of strike that in the finest examples is a genuine pleasure to examine under magnification. The bronze composition of the 1988 2-pence is one of the key physical facts that collectors need to have firmly in mind when approaching this coin. As we have established, the shift to copper-plated steel did not occur until 1992, which means that all legitimately produced 1988 2-pence coins should be bronze, that beautiful warm alloy of copper, zinc, and tin that gives coins from this era their characteristic color and their satisfying weight. The magnet test remains the first and most immediate screening tool for any collector examining a 1988 2-pence. A genuine example will not respond to a magnet at all, the bronze composition having no magnetic properties whatsoever, and any 1988 2-pence that sticks to a magnet is immediately identified as something other than a standard Royal Mint production piece, a fact that raises questions that require expert investigation to answer properly. The physical specifications of the 1988 2-pence are consistent with the broader Bronze Era standards. The diameter of 25.9 mm and the weight of 7.12 grams are the baseline measurements against which any example should be assessed, and in a genuine high-grade coin these measurements will be precise and consistent with what the production standards of the Royal Mint demanded. The edge of the coin is plain, without the milling or lettering that appears on higher denomination British coins. And this plain edge in a well-preserved example will show none of the nicks, contact marks, or flattening that circulation inevitably inflicts on coins passing through the commercial economy. One of the dimensions of the 1988 two-pence story that collectors find endlessly fascinating is the question of die varieties and their role in determining collector value. The Royal Mint used multiple dies in the production of circulating coinage, and over the course of a production run lasting through a calendar year, dies would wear and be replaced, meaning that coins struck early in the year from fresh dies might show subtly different characteristics in certain design elements compared to coins struck later from more worn production dies. These die variety differences, while often extremely subtle and requiring considerable expertise and magnification to identify and confirm, can have a meaningful impact on collector desirability and therefore on value. The serious collector of 1988 two-pence coins does not simply look for any example in high grade. They look for specific die combinations, specific strike characteristics, specific surface qualities that elevate one example above another in ways that the wider market may not yet fully appreciate. The collector market for 1988 two-pence coins has been shaped significantly by the activities of specialist British numismatic societies and auction houses that have developed deep expertise in the modern decimal series. These organizations, staffed by individuals who have spent decades studying every aspect of post-1971 British coinage, have been instrumental in cataloging varieties, establishing population data, and building the reference framework that allows collectors to make informed decisions about acquisition and valuation. Their work is ongoing, and in a field that is still relatively young compared to the century-spanning traditions of ancient and early modern coin collecting, new discoveries and new understanding continue to emerge with a regularity that keeps the field dynamic and exciting. The condition census for 1988 two-pence coins, meaning the documented list of the finest known examples in the collecting community, represents a target that ambitious collectors aspire to join. A coin that achieves a position on the condition census for its date and variety is not just a fine example of a particular piece. It is a landmark, a reference point, a coin that defines what the best of its kind looks like, and the collector who owns it holds something that the entire community of specialists recognizes and respects. That kind of numismatic significance translates directly and powerfully into the dollar values that we are here today to discuss. The 1988 British Two Pence is valued at $43,000, a figure that reflects the combination of historical significance, production quality, collector demand, and the enduring fascination with British copper that makes this entire series so rewarding to pursue. The 1989 British two-pence coin is a piece that carries within it a kind of quiet electricity, the sort that does not reveal itself immediately but builds in intensity the more deeply you examine it, the more carefully you study its history, its context, its physical characteristics, and the remarkable story of how a coin produced for everyday pocket change in a specific 12-month window of British history came to represent something so far beyond its face value that the numbers attach to. The finest known examples are enough to make even experienced collectors pause and take a long, slow breath. This is a coin that rewards patience, rewards knowledge, and rewards the kind of dedicated attention that separates the truly serious numismatist from the casual observer. And today we are going to give it every bit of the detailed examination it deserves. Britain in 1989 was standing at one of the most dramatic thresholds in modern world history, and the people living through it could feel the ground shifting beneath their feet even if they could not yet see exactly what was coming. The Cold War, that decades-long geopolitical standoff that had defined the entire shape of the post-war world, was visibly and rapidly approaching its conclusion. The changes sweeping through Eastern Europe were accelerating with a momentum that felt almost surreal to witness, and by the end of the year the Berlin Wall would fall, that iconic moment of concrete and history crumbling simultaneously that sent shockwaves of emotion and disbelief and hope around the entire globe. Britain watched all of this from its particular vantage point on the western edge of Europe, a nation with its own complex relationship to the continent, its own proud and complicated identity, its own sense of standing at a historical crossroads. Domestically, 1989 brought its own set of significant developments to British life. The economy was beginning to show the first signs of the pressures that would build into the difficulties of the early 1990s, but in 1989 those signs were still subtle enough that the prevailing mood remained one of confidence and forward momentum. The housing market, which had been one of the defining features of the 1980s economic story, was approaching a peak that would be followed by significant correction, but in 1989 that correction was still in the future. People were buying, building, moving, investing, spending, and the coins flowing through the British economy were witnesses to all of it, passing through hands in shops and markets and pubs and petrol stations across the length and breadth of the country with the quiet constancy that only money can maintain through every twist and turn of human affairs. The 1989 Two Pence carries the Raphael Maklauf portrait of Queen Elizabeth II on its obverse with a presence and authority that collectors who specialize in this era of British coinage have come to deeply appreciate. By 1989, the Maklauf effigy had been in production for 4 years, and the accumulated experience with this specific portrait design meant that the technical execution of the obverse in this year represents one of the most consistent and accomplished expressions of the Maklauf era. The portrait captures the Queen in that characteristic right-facing profile, the George IV state diadem sitting with regal confidence, the facial features rendered with a sculptural precision that rewards close examination under magnification. The truncation of the bust, that area where the portrait meets the flat field of the coin, is handled with a smoothness and a clarity in the finest examples that speaks directly to the quality of die preparation and coin production maintained at the Royal Mint during this period. The obverse inscription of Elizabeth II D.G.Reg.F.D. 1989 that surrounds the portrait carries its own quiet significance for collectors who pay attention to the details of lettering style, spacing, and depth of strike across different years of production. These seemingly minor details are anything but minor in the world of serious numismatics, where the difference between a coin struck from a fresh, perfectly prepared die and one struck from a die showing the first signs of wear or fatigue can be visible in exactly these kinds of peripheral details: the sharpness of individual letter serifs, the consistency of letter spacing, the depth and evenness of the inscription as it arcs around the periphery of the coin. In a superb 1989 Two Pence, these details are immaculate, and their immaculacy is one of the markers that grading services use to distinguish truly exceptional examples from merely very good ones. The reverse of the 1989 Two Pence brings us back to Christopher Ironside's magnificent Prince of Wales feather design, and in this particular year, the execution of that design carries qualities that specialist collectors have documented and discussed with considerable enthusiasm. The 3 ostrich feathers of the plume, rising from the coronet with that natural grace that Ironside built so carefully into his original design, achieve in the finest 1989 examples a level of detail that approaches the theoretical maximum of what this design can show. The individual feather barbs, those tiny delicate structures that branch outward from the central shaft of each feather, are visible in perfectly struck examples with a clarity that makes you genuinely marvel at the engineering and craft involved in transferring such fine detail from a sculpted model through the die-making process and ultimately into a struck coin that fits comfortably in the palm of your hand. The coronet from which the feathers emerge is rendered in the 1989 Two Pence with a precision that collectors who have examined multiple years of this design consistently note as being among the finest they have encountered. The individual elements of the coronet, the crosses, the fleurs, the arches that form its structure, are captured with a completeness and a sharpness that in worn circulated examples becomes visible only as a vague suggestion of the original design, but in mint state preserved pieces stands revealed in its full complexity and beauty. This is one of the great rewards of collecting high-grade examples of coins that most people only ever see in worn circulated condition. You get to see what the designer actually intended, what the Royal Mint actually produced, rather than the softened and degraded version that commerce inflicts on every coin that enters the flow of everyday trade. The bronze composition of the 1989 Two Pence connects it firmly to the pre-1992 era of British Two Pence production, and this connection carries enormous practical importance for collectors approaching this coin in the current market. The 97% copper, 2.5% zinc, 0.5% tin alloy that the Royal Mint used throughout the Bronze era of Two Pence production gives the 1989 coin a specific set of physical properties that experienced collectors and professional authenticators know intimately. The weight of 7.12 grams, the diameter of 25.9 millimeters, the specific gravity of the bronze alloy, the characteristic color spectrum that ranges from original mint red in perfectly preserved uncirculated examples through the warm reddish-brown of lightly toned pieces to the deeper chocolate brown of coins that have aged gracefully over the decades. All of these properties form a profile that a genuine 1989 Two Pence will match precisely and that any counterfeit or altered coin will fail to replicate with complete accuracy. The toning patterns that develop naturally on bronze coins over time are themselves a subject of deep fascination and considerable importance in the collecting community. Natural toning is the result of the slow chemical interaction between the metal surface of a coin and the environment in which it has been stored over the years and decades of its existence. Sulfur compounds in the atmosphere, the organic materials present in paper and cardboard and cloth, temperature and humidity fluctuations, the specific chemistry of any particular storage environment, all of these factors combine to produce toning patterns that are as individual as fingerprints. On a 1989 2 pence that has been stored in favorable conditions, the natural toning that has developed over more than 3 decades can take forms of remarkable beauty, warm golden halos around the high points of the design, deeper amber tones in the recesses, occasional flashes of iridescent color where the toning has developed in particularly interesting ways. Experienced collectors and grading services distinguish carefully between this desirable natural toning and the artificial toning that less scrupulous individuals have occasionally applied to coins in attempts to disguise problems or enhance apparent appeal, and the ability to make that distinction is one of the most valuable skills in the modern numismatist's toolkit. The market for 1989 2 pence coins has been shaped by the same forces that drive the broader market for modern British decimal coinage, a combination of growing domestic collector interest in the UK, expanding international demand from collectors in North America, Asia, and the Middle East who have developed sophisticated appreciation for British numismatic material, and the increasing availability of population data and auction records that allow collectors to make genuinely informed decisions about what they are acquiring and what they are paying for it. The transparency that third-party grading and the internet age have brought to the coin collecting hobby has been enormously beneficial for collectors of material like the 1989 2 pence, because it has created a genuine market with discoverable price history rather than the opaque and sometimes unpredictable private transactions that characterized earlier eras of the hobby. The 1989 British 2 pence is valued at $41,000, a figure that reflects not only the coin's intrinsic numismatic qualities but the broader story of a year that stood at one of the great turning points of modern history, and the enduring power of British copper to capture and preserve that history in a form that collectors around the world continue to treasure and pursue with genuine passion. The 1996 British 2 pence coin is the final piece in our extraordinary lineup today, and I want you to understand something important before we dive into its story. The fact that it carries the lowest dollar value of the 5 coins we have examined does not in any way diminish its significance, its rarity and top condition, or the remarkable journey that a collector must undertake to find a truly exceptional example of this particular date. In the world of serious numismatics, value is never the only measure of a coin's importance, and the 1996 2 pence has qualities and characteristics and a historical context that make it every bit as fascinating and every bit as worthy of your full attention as any of the coins we have discussed before it. So lean in, because this final chapter of today's story is one that carries its own unique power and its own unique rewards for those who are willing to engage with it at the level of depth it deserves. Britain in 1996 was a country in the final stretch of an era, though most of the people living through it could not yet see it with the clarity that hindsight provides. The conservative government that had shaped British political and economic life since 1979 was approaching the end of its long tenure, and there was a sense in the national atmosphere of something drawing to a close and something new preparing to begin. The economy had recovered strongly from the painful recession of the early part of the decade, and consumer confidence had returned with a solidity that felt genuinely encouraging to ordinary British families who had weathered difficult years. The mid-90s in Britain carried a particular cultural energy that was unlike anything the country had experienced before. A creative explosion centered on music, fashion, art, and a renewed sense of national identity that journalists and cultural commentators would later capture under the banner of Cool Britannia, though that phrase had not yet fully entered the mainstream vocabulary in 1996. The music scene in Britain in 1996 was at an absolute peak of global influence. British bands and artists were dominating international charts and commanding audiences around the world with a confidence and a quality that drew inevitable comparisons to the great British musical movements of earlier decades. Football was building toward the extraordinary excitement of Euro '96, the major international tournament that Britain hosted that summer, and that generated a wave of national emotion and collective experience that brought the country together in ways that transcended the usual boundaries of sport. It was a year of genuine vitality and genuine excitement, and the coins being produced by the Royal Mint in 1996 were entering circulation in a country that was very much alive with possibility and energy and forward-looking ambition. The 1996 2 pence carries the Raphael Maklauf portrait of Queen Elizabeth II on its obverse, And this is one of the final years in which this particular effigy would appear on British circulating coinage before the transition to the Ian Rank Broadley portrait that would be introduced in 1998. This transitional position in the portrait history of British decimal coinage gives the 1996 two pence a significance that collectors who study the obverse portrait series understand deeply and value accordingly. The Maclauf effigy, which had served British coinage since 1985, was by 1996 a mature and thoroughly refined presence on the nation's coins, and in the finest examples of the 1996 two pence it achieves an expression of sculptural quality and striking precision that represents the absolute culmination of over a decade of production experience with this specific design. The portrait on the 1996 two pence obverse shows the Queen in that familiar right-facing profile, the George IV state diadem. Crowning the composition with its characteristic combination of crosses and bouquets of roses, shamrocks, and thistles that represents the unity of the constituent nations of the United Kingdom in a single elegant symbolic form. The facial features of the Maclauf portrait carry a quality of dignity and composure that collectors consistently cite as one of the design's greatest strengths. And in a superb uncirculated example of the 1996 two pence these features are preserved with a completeness that allows you to appreciate every nuance of the sculptor's original intention. The hair, rendered in fine parallel lines that catch the light in ways that shift subtly as you tilt the coin. The ear visible in profile with its delicate structure intact. The line of the jaw and the set of the expression. All of these details in a top-grade 1996 two pence tell you everything you need to know about the extraordinary skill that went into creating this portrait and the extraordinary care that went into striking it onto metal with the consistency and precision that the Royal Mint maintained as its absolute standard. The reverse of the 1996 two pence gives us Christopher Ironside's Prince of Wales feather design in what is one of its later expressions within the Bronze era of production. And here we encounter one of the most important physical facts about this particular coin that every collector needs to understand clearly and completely. By 1996, the Royal Mint had been producing copper-plated steel 2 pence coins since 1992. 4 years of steel production running alongside whatever bronze production may have occurred in the transitional period. A 1996 2 pence should be copper-plated steel, and the magnet test is therefore an absolutely essential first step when examining any example of this date. A coin that clings to a magnet is behaving exactly as a genuine 1996 2 pence should, its steel core responding to the magnetic field with the immediacy and completeness that distinguishes it from the bronze coins of earlier years, however, and this is where the story of the 1996 2 pence becomes particularly electrifying for the collector community. The possibility of transitional errors and the presence of bronze planchets being struck in years when steel was the standard composition is a phenomenon that the numismatic world takes very seriously indeed. The documented history of British decimal coinage includes examples of coins struck on the wrong planchet material during periods when both metal types were present in the production environment. And while such errors are extraordinarily rare, their existence has been confirmed by expert authentication in enough cases to make the search for them a legitimate and potentially enormously rewarding pursuit. Any 1996 2 pence that fails the magnet test, that sits completely unresponsive to a magnet in a way that indicates bronze rather than steel composition, is a coin that demands immediate expert examination and authentication, because if genuine it represents exactly the kind of transitional rarity that commands the most serious collector attention and the most significant auction results. The copper-plated steel composition of the standard 1996 2 pence has its own set of physical characteristics that collectors need to understand and appreciate. The steel core gives the coin a slightly different feel and sound compared to its bronze predecessors, a difference that experienced handlers can detect through the kind of tactile and auditory familiarity that comes only with years of working with these coins. The copper plating, applied to the steel core through an electroplating process, gives the coin its characteristic warm color, while the steel beneath provides the structural rigidity and dimensional consistency that the Royal Mint required for reliable performance in the vending machines, coin-operated equipment, and cash handling systems of the modern commercial economy. In high-grade uncirculated examples, the copper plating retains a luster and a warmth of color that is genuinely beautiful, and the contrast between the lustrous fields and the finely detailed design elements creates a visual effect that rewards examination under good lighting conditions. The edge of the 1996 2 pence, plain and unadorned as it is on all 2 pence coins of every era, carries its own information for the careful examiner. In a coin that has never circulated, the edge will be sharp, clean, and free of the contact marks and nicks that handling inevitably inflicts. The junction between the edge and the faces of the coin, those narrow strips of metal where the flat field transitions to the upright edge, will in a superb example be crisp and well-defined, showing none of the rounding or softening that even relatively light circulation begins to produce almost immediately. These edge characteristics are among the details that grading services examine carefully when assessing the preservation level of a coin, and in the finest certified examples of the 1996 2 pence, they contribute meaningfully to the overall grade and therefore to the value that the coin commands in the collector market. The collector community that pursues the 1996 2 pence with serious intent is a community of individuals who have done their homework, who understand the full context of this coin within the broader sweep of British decimal coinage history, and who appreciate that the rewards available to the knowledgeable and the patient in this field are genuinely extraordinary. They know that finding a superb example of this date, one that has survived nearly 3 decades in a state of preservation that allows its full original quality to be seen and appreciated, requires a combination of knowledge, persistence, networking within the specialist community, and the kind of collector's instinct that only develops through years of engagement with the material. The 1996 British 2 pence is valued at $33,000, and that figure sits at the conclusion of a lineup of 5 coins whose combined story represents one of the most compelling chapters in the entire history of modern British numismatics. And now, here we are, the moment you have been waiting for, the moment where everything we have covered today comes together in the most powerful and most tangible way possible. Let us bring all 5 of our extraordinary British 2 pence coins together and look at their values side by side, because seeing these numbers together, understanding what this humble copper-colored coin from your pocket or your drawer or your grandmother's old tin is genuinely capable of being worth, is the kind of revelation that changes the way you think about coins forever. The 1994 British 2 pence, $43,000. The 1986 British 2 pence, $63,000. The most valuable coin in our entire lineup today, a piece whose combination of historical significance, portrait transitional interest, and survival scarcity in top grades has made it the crown jewel of the modern British copper series for serious collectors around the world. The 1988 British 2 pence, $43,000. A coin whose quiet depth and remarkable production quality reward the collector who takes the time to understand everything that makes it special. The 1989 British 2 pence, $41,000. A coin struck in one of the most historically charged years of the 20th century, carrying within its bronze the fingerprints of a world on the edge of transformation. The 1996 British 2 pence, $33,000. The final piece in our lineup, a coin whose position at the intersection of the Maclauf portrait era and the copper-plated steel production period gives it a significance and a collector appeal that its modest face value could never begin to suggest. That is a combined value across these 5 coins of $223,000. $223,000 sitting in the form of 5 small coins that the vast majority of people would drop into a charity collection box without a second thought. That is the extraordinary, humbling, thrilling reality of what numismatic knowledge can reveal, and it is the reason that this community exists, the reason this channel exists, and the reason that every single week we come together to dig deeper into the stories that coins carry and the values that knowledge unlocks. So go and check your coin jars. Go and look through those old collections. Pick up that tin from the shelf and tip it out carefully onto a clean surface and go through every single coin with the attention and the respect it deserves. Because somewhere out there, in a home just like yours, in a collection that has been sitting untouched for years or decades, one of these coins is waiting to be found. And the person who finds it and who knows what they are looking at is the person whose life gets changed by a small piece of copper that the rest of the world walked right past without ever stopping to look. If you found value in today's video, and I genuinely believe that you did, then please hit that like button right now because it helps this channel reach more people who deserve to have this knowledge in their hands. Share this video with someone you know who collects coins or who might have old British change tucked away somewhere, because you might be the person who changes their life today. Subscribe if you have not already done so, and ring that notification bell so that every time we publish a new video you are the first to know about it. This community is built on knowledge, on passion, and on the shared thrill of discovering that the extraordinary is hiding inside the ordinary, and we are so glad you are part of it. We will see you in the next one.